us now to talk about what we're seeing in the restaurant industry. Andrew Oliver, President and CEO of Oliver and Bonacini. Always great to have you with us, Andrew.
Thanks so much for having me again.
Okay, so I don't know if you had a time to sort of digest some of the news around the transition from the CERB benefit to employment insurance. We know that some business owners have been worried that the CERB, made to be generous at the outset, was perhaps keeping people from returning to work. As you see this scheme they're laying out with the easier to apply for EI, do you still have those concerns, or do you think people will want to go back to work?
Yeah, look, I think people definitely want to go back to work. I think the bigger issue for hospitality, if you look at the stats out of Ontario, 65% of hospitality workers are still not back, and let's face it, August is probably the best it'll be for the next 6 months out here, given that we have larger than average patios. We've been lucky that the municipalities have increased the patios, and with restrictions, with no signs of restrictions easing, I think people definitely want to get back to work. I think it's not really surprising that they extended CERB without the other plan ready, and potentially with Parliament and taking a month off or a month longer off. But I definitely think people want to get back to work, and I think the bigger concern is how it didn't dovetail into the CEWS program and ideally the enhancement of that of maintaining the connection to your employees.
Okay, so yeah, we do know we have a lot happened this week. We have a new finance minister as well. They're talking about bringing in a new agenda, a throne speech near the end of the month. Not a lot of details though, and I would imagine you just brought up the wage subsidy program, probably more key to you right now in terms of what happens to that. What do you need there in terms of support?
Yeah, so look, last time I was on here, it was great that they extended the program. I think if you look at the finer details, most guys in the restaurant industry I've spoken to were not aware that when they announced that they extended it till the end of the year, they assumed that meant December 31st. That's definitely not the case. It ends a lot earlier than that. And I think the most shocking thing to most guys was that when they read the fine print, it's the beginning of the weaning off of the wage subsidy program. And so, I genuinely believe that in our industry, the odds are likely that the unemployment numbers will go up as the CEWS program winds down if it's not replaced with something else, simply because without the easing of the restrictions at 50% occupancy, and while we are you really have a perfect storm coming in September where you have CEWS support going down, you have it getting colder and colder where patios will be less frequented and moving only into dining rooms at 50% occupancy or 2-meter capacity, which in reality at 2-meter capacity, you're really looking at maybe only getting 35% of your seats back. All of that coupled with the rent subsidy program going away. So you really have a perfect storm right now. And I'm very fearful that without more government intervention at both the provincial and federal level, you're going to see this second wave of layoffs and unemployment and permanent closures September, October, November.
Do you feel when you take a look at your business that they could ease up on the restrictions, yet you could still make a safe environment? I mean, you got to wrap your head around the logistics, I guess, of where people are, where servers are, where the bar are. Is it possible to loosen up a little?
Yeah, look, I'm by no means a medical expert, but what I will say is we are adhering to the rules that the medical profession are laying out for us and the government's laying out for us. Look, there's countless examples in Europe and around the world where they've eased up restrictions from 2 meters to 1.5 down to 1. I think that our governments should most certainly be looking at that. At the same time, a second wave, larger outbreaks are 100% going to be a death blow to the industry. So though I want to do more business, there's no point in doing it unless it's safe. I think that at the same time, it is beholden to the government to do the right thing and say, if we're going to maintain restrictions for the general population and health of our society, we also maybe shouldn't kneecap support to the industries that are on the front lines of this economic crisis. It's great that across the country things are starting to bounce back. It's hugely positive, but our sector and hospitality generally has been hugely left behind. Our sales are still down as an industry 60-70%. And I just think we need a little bit more common sense of saying, look, it's great if other industries and construction and all that kind of stuff has been able to pick up, and we need that. We need those folks generating the tax revenues and dollars to help support our society. But at the same time, I think it only makes common sense that for as long as there are restrictions on hospitality, there should be overlapping support so that we continue to be able to maintain the safety of our guests and patrons while surviving this crisis to thrive once again.
I guess, Andrew, what we're really talking about now is industry-specific support, because we saw through the early months of the pandemic, those questions would be asked, and the approach the Liberals seemed to take was, you know what, we will support all workers, we will support all industries, all these programs will sort of just cover everyone. But as you point out, as other industries get back to work and yours is hamstrung, do you want to see that? Do you want to see, okay, them come out and say, here is specific support for the hospitality industry, for the restaurant industry?
Yeah, so I've been beating that drum since the early days of this crisis, and I think it's just, at the end of the day, the proof is in the pudding. They expanded the CEWS program, and when they did so, I think everyone would agree that it makes no sense for companies making hundreds of millions of billions of dollars in quarterly profits qualified. So whether it be the telecoms or the banks, and my understanding is a lot of them are not taking it. They know it's not meant for them. But the fact that they even qualify because of the wide brush that was painted 6 months after, 5 months after this pandemic started, I think we're sitting here saying, look, common sense is not prevailing. And given how big the deficits are, and there is a limited amount of money to go around, at this stage in the game, it only makes common sense to have strategic surgical help to those that need it to ensure the best economic recovery. Giving telecom companies $25 million in wage subsidy in the month of July after hundreds of millions of dollars in quarterly profits is likely something that I think most Canadians would say, well, geez, that really doesn't make sense. While at the same time saying companies like ours, where our revenues are down 50, 60, 70% due to the restrictions that the government is imposing, perhaps if that money went to guys like us, we would actually have a more robust economy and a more V-shaped recovery on the back end of this.
Andrew, before we let you go, I want to ask you, of course, one of the programs that's been, I guess, a little more controversial in terms of whether it worked the way it was supposed to would be the rent assistance. What's been your experience with that program?
Yeah, look, I think countless restaurateurs out there have literally had to live and die by the generosity of their landlords, whether they qualified for the program or not. And so ultimately, again, I would say it was an epic failure. And we know that the government was working on a new program that what we would hope was for industry specific or those with restrictions that was supposed to come through, or at least what the indication I've been given by the other associations working on it in September. Obviously, that goes out the window now with the proroguement of Parliament, and unfortunately, the rest of society and our economy and those dealing with the tough realities of life can't just put a pause on things when things get tough. My hope here genuinely is that the government will come in with an industry-specific solution that is just common sense, because ultimately it was great that we did what we had to do. A lot of the economy has done very well by what the government's done, and that's great. But now we're at a point where every dollar should count and be about saving jobs and future tax revenues to pay off these monstrous deficits.
Andrew, it's always great to get your insights. Thanks so much for taking the time.
Thanks so much. Really appreciate it.
Andrew Oliver, President and CEO of Oliver and Bonacini.